Hello and welcome. You are listening to an episode of the Sales Chat Show. To stream or download a host of further free episodes that will power your sales success, please visit saleschatshow.com. We really hope that you enjoy and benefit from this episode. So, hello folks, and welcome to yet another episode from the Sales Chat Show, saleschatshow.com, driving your sales forward. The complete Sales Chat Show posse is in the studio today. Steve Lindsey, Anthony Stears, I'm Simon Hazeldine, and today's episode we are looking at onboarding, or in fact, everboarding. So our premise here is everboarding, why sales training should never end, why onboarding, if you like. Maybe onboarding ends, but the process of people learning should never end if you want a high performance culture. So, and we were having a bit of a chat, as we do before we came on air. We were just sharing our various experiences of being onboarded ourselves, or having to onboard new employees, new salespeople, that sort of thing. So we thought we'd share a few thoughts and ideas, maybe drag out some best practices and also some worst practices as well. I think is important to do, because you've gone to a lot of time and effort and money to bring someone in to your organization, and a good onboarding process means they're up to necessary performance level really as quickly as possible, and then we maintain that over time. Also as well, sometimes when people are looking for a new job, they might have 2 or 3 parallel options running at the same time. They might have been talking to you, they might be talking to other companies. They've accepted the job with you. I've seen this happen a few times, and then they've been with you about a week or two, and then they say, "Oh, actually, I'm going somewhere else." So, particularly if they've not had a great first couple of weeks, that new job offer, because the other people are running a little bit slower, maybe in recruitment. So, yeah, just because they've arrived on day one doesn't going to mean they're there 2 weeks later. So, very, very important part of bringing them up to speed. But Anthony, you've been involved in an absolute ton of this. Your experiences?
Well, I sort of boiled it down to a relatively simple process. I think you referred to it as being slightly cynical, but my experience when I've been onboarded and when I've seen this before is usually you do a quick stop in HR and you sign a code of conduct of how you're going to behave. You maybe sign out your company car, your laptop, that kind of stuff. Then typically you move on to your line manager, who will then show you the systems that you're going to use. So here's your email login, here's your CRM stuff, here's access to our portal and blah, 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 blah. So here's your systems. And then it moves into product, because those first bits don't really take very long. So then it's all about learning the product itself, the products or services that you're going to be selling. And as you said, I think that you've got to be careful here, because you may have somebody who's a complete novice coming in, or somebody who's been in the industry for 20 years. I think the onboarding and how that product information is delivered should vary slightly there. But anyway, then you will potentially get, depending on what industry or sector you're in, maybe some health and safety training if you're in more of a factory kind of environment. If you're in the world of finance, you'll be looking at compliance and due diligence and things like that. So you've got a few little areas there. Then what typically happens, particularly if you're in the world of sales, they will slap you with their sales playbook, which is their strategy of how they do their discovery and qualification, that they'll usually show you a framework for, and then typically dropped in the deep end to go and figure out what's going to happen when you get going. You might get lucky enough to shadow a couple of people, and then typically it's sink or swim time. So slightly cynical.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was I sort of accused Anthony. I said, "Oh, that sounds a bit cynical, mate." But now, as you've actually articulated it, yeah, and also it sounds like a lot. That's my
yes,
and that was my. I was sharing with Steve and Anthony before we came on air that I transferred over from one part of a very large FMC company, one division across to another division. Excuse me. And I had a very, very comprehensive sort of 2 week induction where I went and met 20 different people. And one of the people, I just remember it was a 45-minute sort of one-way lecture about barcodes, which you need, QANs and CHUANs they were called back in the day, inside and outside barcodes, and obviously very, very important if you're in retail. But I did not understand particularly the relevance of this. And I just remember sitting there nodding politely thinking, I have no idea what this is about. My brain was full of all this information. So I think my first thing is, can we please spread this out a bit? Give people a fighting chance, to rather than let's get everything ticked off the list. I think having a list to check you have done things is a good thing, but if it becomes a tick box, tick 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 tick, I think you're being a bit tough on people, right? You're trying to too much too soon, and the brain just goes, I've had enough.
Yes, I think it can definitely be quite overwhelming when you come into a new job because you're trying to make a good impression. You're trying to remember lots of different things, different people, different products, different systems. And yeah, it can be quite overwhelming. In fact, Steve, of all of us here, obviously you have a team, so you've done this induction process before. How do you sort of come at it?
Yeah, I mean, for us being like a micro business, of course, you take a lot of your own personal experiences, and rightly or wrongly, that kind of takes the bias as to how you onboard and how you train people. I didn't have a dissimilar onboarding to yourself, Anthony, when I first started off in the world of exhibitions and trade shows, albeit mine was quite fast tracked. Finished university, did traveling for a couple of years, went and started at an exhibition company and went through contract, tick box exercise, all the HR policies. Then after that, I was basically told, you've got 15 projects / pavilions to organise. Crack on with it.
Crack on.
You've got a deadline on Friday. So aside from not even know what the deadline was, you just have to. It was a sink or swim. Yeah. Now, for me, I suppose from the company I worked for or the managers I worked for, it was more luck than judgment. It was the fact that they weren't set up. They didn't have any training. There was massively under-resourced. For me, it worked really well because I'm much better off getting stuck into projects. That's how I learned quickly. And I suppose fast forward to Lincoln West, I would never drop anyone in it like I was dropped in it at the beginning. I don't think that's a fair thing to do, but I've been a big believer of giving people projects early doors from day one. You know your systems, you know your business. People are not going to break your business. If they have, then you've probably got a fundamental flaw in your business in the first place. But those onboarding for me is I love allocating projects to people because that way you get to find out what's going on inside their heads, what experience they've got from past lives, past jobs, their friends, their family network. What can they bring to the table? You don't want this carbon copy of the last person who was working there to then come in, and you want a blueprint of the exact same person coming in. So just to give people some live projects to work on, like for me, I found that's been really beneficial. You get to find out what makes people tick and find out what their key strengths are. I think most importantly, for any as long as you're setting out what the outcome, what result do you want at the end of it, try not to dictate how they get there. Yeah. And for me, that onboarding process, yes, it's had to be different for every person. And I'm talking back to pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, everyone was in the office. COVID, 100% remote. And then post then, we've had onboarding of people in hybrid situations. So I think you have to adapt it to really.
The thing I really like in Steve's is that it's the active involvement in the induction. You start to do something that's useful. It starts to be relevant. I think my sort of experience, it was largely passive. I was largely a passive listener and being told. And that's obviously not great from a learning point of view, right? If you understand the relevance, but more important, if you actually get to do something, I think that is the
having skin in the game. I think that's the key thing. Like knowing that we all know that we learn a lot more when we make mistakes. Now, obviously, there's different levels of mistakes and errors and failures, but if we've got a bit of skin in the game, Yes, absolutely. We accept the rewards when it goes well, but also we accept the learning off the back
Yeah.
of it. And if you've got skin in the game, then you do put a little bit more pressure on yourself. You do dig a bit deeper into what I should be doing and what I should be asking. Whereas if it's just going through that process of this is what you should do, this is how it's been done before, you don't get results.
And I suppose you then quite quickly feel like you are part of the team rather than observing the team. Because I know that shadowing and stuff can be useful, but too much of it, and like you say, Simon, being told and just listening to stuff isn't the best way for most of us to actually learn and absorb. We have to kind of roll up our sleeves and learn for ourselves, put it into practice. Steve, what I was loving about what you were saying is with the new hire, as long as they understand the goal, you said you're not really fussed about how they get there, which is lovely, because as long as they understand the goal, it actually reminds me of Kevin Gaskell, speaker that we know through the Professional Speaking Association, and he always talked about how it's the people within the business that you change, right? That's the thing that you have to change in a business. He says he doesn't go in and fire everybody; he just gets everybody to believe and want to achieve the same goal. Okay, and yeah, it's kind of lovely that you then try then to support them to achieve the goal, the agreed goal, because everybody's moving in the same direction. I just think that a lot of the things that I tend to see are almost too scripted. So you get a lot of product information, how to present stuff, and you get lots of kind of scripts basically. And we're not actors, so we don't learn them like actors do, or we try to, but it tends to end up getting read. And if you can give people a framework and an end goal, I think you're going to get far more out of them, because for me, a script tells people what to say. A framework or a structure teaches people how to think. And you want people to think. You want people to think and get there. And like you say, you don't want to cloud how they think by making it too rigid. You just have to kind of enable them, support them, and guide them where it is they're trying to go, and then trust them, right?
But I think
sorry,
Steve. Yeah, you go, Steve.
And I think, and that's a really hard thing. I think in an ideal situation, that's what we do. But being brilliant, it's really hard for me to do that. I've worked in B2B events for 25 years, so I've learned quite a lot along the way, and it's so much easier for me to say, there's a project, you do it this way, because I've already gone through those learnings before, and I've gone down this route and it hasn't worked out before. So as a small business owner, I can't afford to lose time. I just want people just to go in, and as wicked as it sounds, just do as I'm telling you, because I know it works this way. But I have to consciously hold myself back, because I know it might be a short-term win, but longer term it's not going to help. And it's something which I have to kind of battle with myself, because I've got a little bit of OCD as well, and I want, as my team will say, there's certain things I want done in a certain way, but I know longer term we get the best out of the outcomes when actually there's a little bit of sort of license to go and look at different things. It certainly helps me, because it helps me look at things differently when we've got an outcome, whether it be good, bad, or indifferent. Actually, we've found something out which is new. So it's not an easy thing, and it's I don't want to come across like as in, oh yeah, I'm amazing on board and I just give everyone a free rein. It's absolutely not the case at all, because there is a little bit of an authoritarian about it, because I know my B2B events. There's certain, I don't know much, but that's what I do know. So I have to hold myself back.
And as a good leader, it's you tend to have more experience, and you should be sharing the learnings that you've had along the way, particularly the ones that you've learned the hard way, and trying to share that. Sometimes people have to learn for themselves, but like you say, I think that I certainly don't want to suggest that they literally come in, they have a beer with you, and you let them know that you trust them and they get on with
Steve,
it.
you are conscious of those tendencies, which is nobody's perfect, right? But I think also, your thing was around, what have they got to bring when they come into the organisation? The onboarding is not right. Let's get them onboarded to us. It's also, hang on, we've got a new individual here, a fresh pair of eyes. And also, I think a best practice is, what is the experience level of the person? And therefore, we obviously adapt the onboarding process. They're a very experienced sales veteran. They need to know how to sell your product and service, or the way that you do it, and so on and so. But you can trust that they've got most of the core kind of skills. Someone who's never sold before, they're going to need a kind of a different. So definitely a one size fits all is not going to work.
And also as well, I mean, you think if your business is ticking along well, the numbers are looking good, everyone's a little bit more relaxed. So when leaders, managers, coaches are a bit more relaxed, then they don't mind people taking a little bit longer, or perhaps going a bit off piste. When your back's against the wall and the company's already behind on the quarter, or the sales team behind on their monthly target, the coach or the manager they've got external pressures, so they're going to be wanting to fast track some of this onboarding and this training. They want people to get up to speed a lot quicker, and then it can take away the I suppose the personal approach as to how someone wants to do their job, or how they can achieve their own outcome. So definitely how the business is going at the time will have an impact as to how the onboarding or the everboarding is delivered.
And I had a few years where I was a sales manager of a sort of a group of what were called brand development representatives. So we had sort of folks in the call center, and that was generally our hunting ground for the next field salespeople who were coming to my BDR team, and then the BDR team was the feed for the account manager, the more senior role. So you were sort of constant. I was constantly team of 10. I was constantly churning the team as it was going on. So we inducted a lot of people, and because it's very professional FMCG, there was a really good onboarding process. There was some sales training where they went and attended a program, so sort of developed some sort of practices that worked pretty well. So you would early days send them out to shadow different people so they could see different approaches, obviously choosing the people quite carefully. So you ideally want them to see your better people, definitely not your sort of worst people. Sometimes they were coming in to take over a territory, so there then will be the existing salesperson would introduce them to the customers and all of that sort of good stuff. But also, you were very clear as a sales manager, very clear on what was expected of you. You were expected to spend 3 to 4 days a week out in the field, driving along with your people in the car, doing the coaching kind of stuff. So obviously, what I would do with the new onboarding is I would prioritize them once a week, twice a week. Don't crowd them too much, but go out with them regularly. And I learned a very valuable lesson. We brought in a really, really super bright guy called Nick, and luckily his arrival coincided with the residential sales training. So he went off and did his 3 or 4 days of sales training. And then I booked a time out with him, and we were driving around, and it was Hull. Hull was part of his territory. And this was, because I'm old, this was pre-sat-nav, right? Pre-GPS. So Nick's got an A to Z map of Hull. Now, today, health and safety would freak out about this, but we used to navigate around with so partially when I was out on my field visits, I was the navigator, right? Because for my own personal safety. So you're driving around, you're trying to find your new customer for the first time. That's pretty stressful, and we do that. And I could see he was a bit tense, a bit. Obviously, he's got his boss out with him for the first time. He's on a new territory. He wants to look like he's doing a good job. I mean, he's a super bright, super sharp guy. So we arrive at like one of I think the first customer, and I was just going to say, right, off we go. And he turned to me and he said, "I've set my 3 core objectives." And I went, right, and that was the company standard, right? Three smart objectives for every call. And I said, oh, right, what are those? And he told me what they were. And I said, okay, have you ever met this customer before? He said, no. And I said, okay, so how do you know that those are worth, he said, yeah, but you've got to have 3, right? And I went, I'll tell you what, let's just go in and have a chat, shall we? So we went in and had a chat. And I just said to him, Nick, love the energy, love the focus, but can I please, we're going to give you 2 objectives for your first month meeting all your new customers. Objective number 1, find your customer where they are. safely, please, safely in one piece. Secondly, go and have a chat with them and say hi and just ask them a few questions. And he went, am I allowed? And I was like, yes, you are. I'm your boss. That's the standard for the first month. And it just took the pressure off the guy because he's really clever. And there's a great coaching equation. I think it's Tim Galway that performance is potential minus interference. And if you take away that interference, you allow people to use more of their potential. And not surprisingly, he went on to be one of the superstar top performers in the team. But, he was trying to do too much too soon. Sometimes we try and do too much soon. You just got to let people go, right? Trust people, right? Or else they get disillusioned, And then I always used to assign them a mentor in the team, like a buddy, who's someone in the team who was a good seller, but actually cared about people and had the right attitude and all that sort of stuff. And that was the person. And I said to them, they're there so you can always ask them any stupid questions that you don't want to ask your boss. And you should be able to ask your boss anything. But in the first few weeks, you think, I know he told me where that goes in the CRM, but I don't want to phone him up because I'm going to sound really stupid. I can phone Anthony. Anthony goes, yeah, it's in there, mate. Drop down menu. Like, it's though, you know what I mean? They should be able to ask you anything, but they just don't. Because they don't want to look silly, stupid, incompetent in front of their, in front of their boss. And so, we devised a reasonably robust.
So I suppose it's the balance, right? Of giving information at a digestible rate, giving them a little bit of time to shadow and see what people are doing, but then, like Steve was saying, actually give them a project to sink their teeth into. As long as they understand the goal or the outcome of this particular project, then, like you say, sometimes it's good to tap into a new perspective and a new hire rather than rigidly telling them how it must be done.
And then there is the Centre for Creative Leadership. They came out, originally with which to some degree this model has been slightly superseded, I think, by, social learning and things like that, which was the 70-20-10, that, 10% of your learning will come from formal training, 20% from learning from others, mentoring, coaching, etc., 70% from doing the job. So kind of like, it's not going to be that different for the induction, is it? You're going to learn more about your job by doing, which I think with Steve's really is. Let them do something so they feel useful. And they make it, they're making a contribution.
And I think as well, whether it's a project, and that project could be a particular client or a campaign or whatever that initiative is, the key thing with it is that frequency of touching base. As you said, Simon, you've got a mentor there, or you're spending more time with your sales manager. Having that frequency of conversation makes you realise whether you are on the right track. And a bit like the old timping bowling buffers, you can just kind of bounce yourself back in again. Where if you have all the knowledge, all the insight, all the products dump on you in that first couple of weeks, and you interpret it one way, not necessarily the wrong way, but it could just be you're going off on a set direction, and that's a bigger ship to turn around if you've gone that far in without having that frequency of having that regular mentorship or buddy touch base.
And I think that checking in. And it's got to be checking in, not checking up by attitudinally. But I think you contract with that person and agree the frequency and stick to it. And then be prepared to flex it up and down based on a conversation, with them. Because, sometimes it's often, micromanagement's a bad thing. I don't think micromanagement is a bad thing if it's about the right thing at the right time and the person agrees that that's the approach. Though the first time I had to discipline and then subsequently dismiss a salesperson, my boss, with my buy-in, worked very, very closely with me through that process. I'd never done it. It's a horrible situation to have to do. You want to do the right thing by the salesperson. You have to do the right thing by the company. But he managed me very closely the first time as I did it. And almost like bizarrely, my next boss, I had to took over a new team and somebody needed to go, and he was so impressed with how I handled the dismissal procedure that he sort of appointed me as the dismissal mentor for the other sales managers. So I sort of became the dark angel of death, which was not really a mentoring. you know, like, you know, can you speak to Jackie? She's got a problem with it. And I think, oh, again, I'm like, what Simon Hazeldine best known for? Dismissing people. I was thinking, this is not the mentoring role I aspire to. But the reason for it is because I'd been coached to do it well, closely micromanaged to do it well. I actually I could follow the process quite well. Sorry, Steve, you're going to say.
I was going to say, when colleagues start checking out, well, what's in Simon's diary? Like, am I finished?
Yeah.
Is Simon speaking to my line manager in the next fortnight?
Yeah, it's just like this horrible. But it's obviously it is. That's where you do need somebody, for example, to mentor you, right? And that's also like an everboarding, right? Hopefully it's never going to happen. If it does happen, that's when you need a bit of that extra help, right? To do.
And you talked about sort of everboarding, so that this becomes a continual thing. And you mentioned there about not wanting to micromanage. Now, micromanaging is basically just really watching over them, and there's nowhere to hide. Everything's very visible. We talked about this on previous episodes, and so we refer to it with the onboarding as shadowing, where you get to go and watch what one of your colleagues going to do it properly, and this is where you're supposed to learn. Later on, obviously, rather than micromanaging, you can still create a lot of visibility by what I get people to do is have call buddy sessions. So if you have to sit on the phones and phone your customers, whether it's cold outreach, follow-ups, whatever it is, you have a call buddy. So you take it in turns, you listen in. Okay, it's not your boss doing it, it's one of your peers. And because you're being watched, you pull your socks up a bit more, you make sure you try and do a good job, and you start to get a bit of feedback at the end of it. And it's not designed for your colleagues to start being your boss, but if they can just tell you one thing that they liked about what happened in that conversation, but something else that they may have asked or said, you might kind of start to learn from each other. And actually, like you say, it's everboarding, not just onboarding. And you mentioned it as well with the shadowing. About shadowing, you talked about the best sellers. I think was the phrase that you obviously want to shadow the best sellers because you want them to get the best habits. I work with a franchise company and lots of smaller businesses, lots of different personalities. And when people had done their induction training, I used to suggest that they would do call buddy sessions with 3 particular people in the network. And it was because one of them, she was the bubbliest, friendliest person in the world. And you could realize that you could have a really friendly, bubbly conversation with anybody if you do what she does. Okay. Then there was another chap who used to ask a million questions. He was the only guy I knew that when I set them a getting referrals challenge, that he managed to get multiple referrals from multiple people, whereas everybody else was trying to get one referral from one person and move on to the next. Okay. And that was to teach people that you can actually ask a lot more questions than you think. You probably don't have to do it to his extent, but let's just see how much he can do it. Right. And then the last chap was actually their top gun sales performer. And he was the most unassuming, unsales-like person you've ever met. But he was consistent. He had days of the week. Everything was in his diary. He had days of the week where he did certain types of phone calls for certain amounts of time. And his whole diary was mapped out constantly, right? And it was interesting because what I was trying to say to people is they've all got good habits. What you need to find out is you now need to do it your way and have some good habits too, right? Yeah. And it's a bit like becoming a chef. When you're new into the kitchen, you just cut the vegetables you're told to cut. Okay, then you get to start to cook a little bit. Okay, and then you start to learn recipes, and then you master those recipes. And then as you build your confidence, you start to have your own recipes. And once you get a few recipes, you then start to run your own kitchen. And it's just about maturing, I think, through the journey. And I think that's where this sort of hits the nail on the head is onboarding shouldn't be onboarding. It should be everboarding. And I think that continually challenges everybody to raise their game as opposed to get to a point where you're left alone and you can just get on with it. And like you say, Steve, when things go good, we do get a bit more lax. We get away with cutting corners. We can take a little bit longer. And that's when
your point, Anthony, as well, just made me remember as well the thing that came out in later stages by sort of learning experience is, and it links to Steve's comments about making it active, is I'm going to send you out for the day with Julia, right? For example, oh great, I'm out for the day. It's quite a passive, sit in the car, drive along. I'd say, right, Jules is the best person in the team at the discovery stage of the call, right? So what I would like you to do is make notes, observe what what Jules does, And then when we have our one-to-one, what I want to do is I want you to tell me what you've noticed about the way she does it. And then I say, when you're out with Louisa, when you're out with Lou, she is the best closer in the team, right? So what I want you to do is note so they're going in, not going, oh, I'm out for the day, wandering around. I've got a report, but not report back to Simon in that sense, but I've been given a task to do. You're out with Mike. He journey plans better than he's the most efficient person, right? Ask him how he journey plans. How does he plan his route every month? What does he do? And then you make it an active learning experience, not a passive sitting in the passenger seat being driven, being driven around meetings. Hello, I'm Simon, I'm new. It's like, give him a job.
But that's great. I mean, that goes back to, the fundamentals that Nick picked up. He needs to have his 3 objectives. Those 3 objectives don't need to be get the deal closed. Those 3 objectives are actually number 1, listen; 2nd, observe duels; 3rd, report back. Those objectives. I think maybe it's the looking back to what you said around micromanaging. We're of an age where if you mention the term micromanaging, that's a negative thing to be referred to, because it's spoken about when times of stress or someone's not performing. But actually, if we can start reframing some of these words so that it's not a scaremongering exercise. And so I loved you mentioned about shadowing. I mean, we could go into the realms of stalking there, because if someone's shadowing, but it's how those words are framed, really. But the most important thing is actually, I suppose, taking the pressure off of people, isn't it?
It's I think the reframing of some of these things is important. And there is just one thing, and obviously this episode was inspired by quite a lot of our recent episodes from the State of Sales Report 2026, which Steve's organisation, the growthhub.me, produce. And it just came up as an idea about Everboarding, onboarding, and it was actually in the report as sort of like a mid-problem that sales leaders find when using sales enablement to do onboarding of people. And I've at the danger of getting on my soapbox here. I absolutely believe sales enablement, sales training, sales excellence are going to play a very important role in onboarding, but onboarding is the responsibility ultimately of the recruiting manager and the line manager, right? You don't delegate this. You delegate aspects of it, but I would just hope that, why don't sales enablement do a better job of onboarding people? Well, why don't you do a better job of onboarding people then? Right? It's just like,
So now you said that, I feel that and this is my personal opinion here. So sales enablement, I think, should be in at not a ground zero, at ground zero minus 1 month, and then after 3 months. Because like you say, I think the induction should be by your line manager. However, to help spread some of this stuff out, I think there should actually be some pre-onboarding that potentially goes on before you get there, so that when you do get somewhere, you're not getting straight into some of the silly things that you should know already that HR are going through their tick list of telling you all of these individual things. So I think if we could get people before they come, and I know that isn't always necessarily possible, but actually start educating them, feeding them, giving them access to resources before they arrive, makes them feel a little bit more prepared. There doesn't have to be an expectation of what they will know by that point, but I can guarantee they'll know more than they did if you didn't. Okay.
And I don't think that's a huge ask there, Anthony. I mean, how many people go for a job these days and they only have one interview and then they've got the job? Like, people are so scared around making decisions. Accountability is getting spread across so many different roles and departments. So whatever role you're going into, there's often a minimum of 2 interviews or a third stage interviews. It is being dragged on. So absolutely. I mean, part of that interview process could be like an initial onboarding stage, as it were, a little project that comes into play there. And Simon, to your point, I think it's spot on. With a big chunk of responsibility should be with a recruiting manager. A recruiting manager would have been there during the interview process for them to just then hand over on day one. I've hired this person. Now it's over to you, enablement. And if it doesn't work out, then it's your head's on the chopping block. It's a bit harsh when enablement, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see enablement getting involved in any of the recruitment process, so that they're actually meeting those people for the first time on day one. So I think that's a valid point, Anthony.
That's kind of and I love that, and I wrote it down when you said it, and then I've linked it to something that's happened recently, which you talked about having almost a mini project as part of the interview process, basically. And my nephew, bless him, is about to enter the world of work. He's just managed to secure a job with a very high-end brand automotive company. I'm not going to name them on here, but part of his recruitment process, and there was, I think, 20 odd people that young people that all turned up for this one particular role. They ended up doing what he described as an apprentice style challenge.
Oh yeah,
And it turns out he was one of the project managers. So I guess that shows well, I guess that then puts you in a position where people then have to step forward and show some of their skills and their confidence and things like that. And it's that mini project thing, I think, is a fantastic way of getting people engaged, not necessarily testing them, but getting them engaged in the company and the culture and the goal and
get them on board. And I think as well, the line manager just sort of bring things to a close as well. Like, I'll share a worst practice. It's always a very strong believer the line manager should be there to greet the person on the first day. And at one stage, I was running the sort of like the sales learning and development team, and I had one person supporting me, administrative support, and we needed another one. So recruited a lady called Jenny, and obviously, absolutely, very vitally important, line managers there to greet the person on their first day as they arrive to the company. Unfortunately, that coincided with me being booked in to have a vasectomy, and I was absolutely petrified at the prospect. So I drove down to our headquarters in Luton. I had about a 2-hour journey back. And so I needed basically to see Jenny at 9 o'clock and leave at 10 to disappear off. So can you imagine, you arrive on your first day, you're collected by your line manager who greets you with, "Hello, Jenny, welcome to the company. Unfortunately, I can only be with you for an hour. I'm going to leave you with Caroline after that because I've got to go and have a vasectomy," because I was so terrified. And this poor person just sort of went, shaking my hand and went, "Okay," thinking, like, that's a bit too much too soon, isn't it? Like, from your new boss on the first day talking about, I was driving back home going, why did I say that?
Just overshare a little bit.
Why did I was terrified, right? I was absolutely petrified of this, which actually was a walk in the park, folks, if it ever comes down to you. But I just remember the look on her face. It was just like, why have I said I'd come and work for this guy? He's very strange, It was just like so.
Oh dear. Well, yes, I have to say, I think the first day for anybody is going to be a bit scary. But I think obviously there's different challenges for those that are starting in a company where you're turning up in the office and everybody's there, or whether it's more of a remote, like Steve was saying, hybrid type position where you want somebody to feel included and part of the team, but they might actually be in a different country.
Yeah, and it's different horses for car, I think, is definitely the thing we said. So, guys, just in terms of time, so closing thoughts. Steve, couple of things that you think have stood out for you.
Me, I think for everboarding is key. Frequency, regular check-ins, bite-sized learning, and I think live, real learning for me. And to your point, if you ask some of the Jess, Tom, or some of the junior people who are now senior in Lincoln West, they all had a little project on day 2, and that was create their own events that they could sell and market, and that worked really well.
Brilliant. Excellent. Mr. Steers, what about for you?
For me, it's actually just the little idea of the involving little projects in part of the interview process, because I think that gets people to then start learning and engaging and using their brain at an early stage, as opposed to trying to get them to memorize information. But I suppose bit of a cheesy phrase, but one of the things that Steve mentioned with it was actually before this, that a lot of his team aren't salespeople in inverted commas there, or traditionally or see themselves as traditional salespeople. And I think that if you can create the right culture, then actually the sales will come anyway. So I know that sales is the outcome, but culture is the goal. And I think if you can do that through proper onboarding, embracing it, and leveraging new people and new perspectives, then you can only get stronger by guiding people rather than telling them. That's for sure.
So for me, I think it's space it out. Give people ample time, pace it correctly. Iterative learning helps to drive it, and then I think make it active and involve action learning. Have a look at the concept of action learning by the genius that was Reg Revens and stuff like that. So it's a great way to do that. And ultimately, if you are the sales manager, you are the line manager, you are responsible for that salesperson's performance. Other people help you, but you have to take that responsibility on, which is what all good sales managers, sales leaders will absolutely do. So guys, thank you very much for all those thoughts and ideas. This is one of over 300 episodes that will be in the Sales Chat Show back catalogue, all available from all the major podcast platforms. So wherever you like to get your podcast, you'll find the Sales Chat Show. And so until next time, we would like to wish you good luck and good everboarding, onboarding, and bringing in amazing high-performance salespeople into your organisation. See you next time. You have been listening to an episode of the Sales Chat Show. To stream or download a host of further free episodes that will power your sales success, please visit saleschatshow.com. Thank you very much for listening to this episode, and from everyone here at the Sales Chat Show, we'd like to wish you good luck and good selling.